Hey everyone, welcome to the 229th episode of Just Shoot It, a podcast about filmmaking, screenwriting, and directing. This episode is brought to you by patrons Neil Awesome and Kyle McConaughey, whose hat I am mailing out today, as long as the USPS is still in service. I'm Oren Kaplan.
I'm Matt Enlow. Today we've got Eugene Kotlyarenko, the director of Spree, the new movie starring Joe Keery. You recognize him from Stranger Things, even though his hair has changed. Spree is a super fun movie. It's kind of like a new take on found footage. It's like a lot of social media live streams, a lot of GoPro. It's really inventive, really stylized, really cool, and has a very cutting edge kind of point of view about social media and the nature of attention and the economy behind attention, and also, the darker sides. Eugene is super smart. It's really a great conversation. We get into the philosophical aspects of filmmaking and what it means to make a thriller in this era, and also talk a lot about the practicalities of making a social media streaming thriller. So it's great. And also the movie is out now. You can check it out on VOD, but also go check it out in the drive-in. It's in drive-ins across the country. And I have a couple friends who went to the ArcLight screening and had a great time.
Really?
Yeah, it's a super fun movie. Oren and I both got to watch it in advance of the conversation. And this is a great drive-in movie. Like, if there is a silver lining for moviegoers, it's that the drive-in is back in a meaningful way. And so if you're lucky enough to have one in your town, or if there are pop-ups, go check it out. Super fun.
Yeah, it's funny. You and I feel like we interview a lot of people, a lot of filmmakers, sometimes about their film, sometimes not. Sometimes we've seen the film, sometimes we haven't. But, we usually kind of let people listen to the conversation and decide if they should go. But for some reason, we're all in on this film.
I think it caught both of us by surprise, because I don't think on paper it would be the type of movie that either of us would be interested in.
What,
and not to
a
be
poster with a guy who's got blood all over his face. That's not your first click.
Not my first choice. And also, there's a few red flags, I would say. It's a ride sharing movie, which isn't inherently a bad idea, but we've seen the bad version of that a handful of times already. Social media satire, I feel like it can veer into
Didn't
kids
Logan
just
Paul
be taking...
already do that?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Sorry,
or
Jake Paul.
Yeah, ugh. Yeah, kids be taking selfies is kind of the dumbest version of that take, and this movie is so much more than any of that kind of obvious first blush analysis of a film. So I think we both really enjoyed it. We also, not to get too deep into how we make the show, but we kind of have tried to find a balance of who has seen the movie and who hasn't. We want to make sure that there's some objectivity so that we can talk about from the perspective of a person who hasn't seen the film, since we're assuming that most of our listeners haven't had the chance to see a movie yet when we're talking to a filmmaker about it. But this is the rare circumstance where both of us decided to see the film and loved it. So
yeah,
it's pretty great.
Well, if you don't mind me jumping on that line of explaining part of how this show comes together, and it is part of how we get our guests. So a lot of guests are pitched to us by publicists. And I just think Eugene, who was pitched to us by a publicist, is a really good example of an independent filmmaker that still lives in Los Angeles and knows a lot of people. And the reason he ended up on the podcast is that we had so many touch points with him. He was pitched to us by his publicist. Both Matt and I, totally by coincidence, have worked with the editor of this movie, Ben Moses Smith.
I think not entirely I think I recommended him to you. So that's not a coincidence.
Oh, no, sorry. Not a coincidence that you and I have worked with. By coincidence, he's the editor of the movie that Eugene directed.
And it's super well cut, which is really nice also.
Yeah, and on top of that, I had met Eugene randomly at a Pokey store around the corner from my house. So even if you're not in the Hollywood system, I think there is something... and again, I know during a global pandemic when we're in a hot spot of COVID, it's maybe not the hot topic of the moment, but living in LA when things are normal does connect you to people in just the weirdest, most random ways. And I think what we've learned from so many of our past hundreds of guests is that just meeting someone one time it's hard to turn that into something, but building a bunch of relationships and touch points, and meeting someone in 2005 and then later on working with them in 2016 is just a totally normal part of the film business. And I know most of our listeners know that, but the those of you that are a little bit more on the outskirts, I think my reasoning for why it's so important to just build your network and find your people. And, if you come out to LA at some point, you meet some people and interact.
I think also it's worth mentioning that Eugene has a handful of films that played South by Southwest and were really innovative and interesting, and oftentimes experimented with the same sort of themes and formal approaches that he's taken with Spree, with computer screens and all of that. But I think he talks really eloquently in this episode about how those first few movies he just went and shot. He did them quickly over 7 days with his community of people. He kind of cast and put them all together in a fun, unique way based off of the community that you're talking about, right? And so I think that there are people who are listening in a different place and they're thinking, well, Hollywood is full of fakes, or everyone is just out for themselves, or networking sounds gross to me. And I get that and agree with that in a certain sense. And also, if you take the idea of building community and collaborating people and just being nice and open to relationships and collaborations, the point of living in Los Angeles is that you're more likely to run into people who have the same goals and aspirations and are willing to help each other. That's the point, right? And so that's why we are still here. And so I think Eugene really does a good job of representing the potential and possibility of that sort of mindset.
Yes, and Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles did pay us to say all those things. We're losing people at a very fast clip. We're trying to get some new people back into Hollywood. Cool. Well, before we talk to Eugene, I wanted to talk real quick about this idea that Matt and I had of something we could do during the pandemic that can not necessarily replace our live shows, but that would give us a little bit of a slice of interactivity with our listeners, and especially our listeners that are not local to where we have the live show. And so we came up with an idea called Office Hours, Just Shoot It Office Hours, that we're going to try out on Thursday, August 27th. My mom's birthday, by the way.
Hey, happy birthday, Judy. So, the idea is that, we were just inspired by so many people who reach out and want to talk about their film or have a specific question or, just want to kind of talk with us, hang out for a little bit. And so, we've seen so many great examples of people live streaming panels or doing kind of remote interview shows. And we knew that wasn't really going to be something that we would add to the conversation a ton, but we thought, it would be great to be able to talk with people and in real time check out their reel, check out the trailer to their new indie film, answer any sort of questions, and then just hang out, keep it casual. And so the idea of Office Hours, I think, kind of clicked in for us and makes a ton of sense in terms of just it being a little bit more of a party. And certainly we're trying to curate things a little bit so that it's not chaos. But the biggest bummer of the show sometimes is that we have to turn down a lot of really exciting, cool people who have interesting things to say and want to chat, with our listeners about it, but for whatever reason it doesn't work out. And so this is kind of a backdoor for that as well. And so if you've ever wanted to talk about a film, and again, it can't just be promotional, but if there's something that the community could learn from, say, distributing your film during the era of COVID, or how you made a movie with no money, or that sort of stuff, I think those conversations can be had, and we're trying to build a platform for it.
Yeah, and I think you can also, if there's something you want to tell us, correct us. It's not necessarily has to be a one-way thing. I think this is the way it's going to work. We're trying this for the first time. It's kind of a format that I think we came up with, so I don't know how well it'll work, but this is kind of what I was picturing. We're going to be doing this from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific time on Thursday, the 27th of August. And we are going to have 12 10-minute slots?
Yeah, I think so.
And we will have 12 listeners sign up for those slots, and they can log on. Anyone else is welcome to join, but they're the ones that will kind of have a question. Or
they'll have dibs, basically.
Or show their reel or show a short or whatever they want to do. We're all yours for that 10-minute chunk, and then we will cycle on to the next person. And I think we're going to open it up to patrons for the initial sign-up period, and then we're going to open it up to anyone else that might want to talk to us. So it might just be Matt and me and you, whoever you are, or Matt and me and you and like a few other people that are just along for the ride, listening, typing things in the chat and stuff. But we thought this might be a cool thing. It's like office hours with observation optional.
So swing on by, hang out, chat with us. Let's see how the conversation goes. If we're having a great time, we might go longer, but we will be there from 7 to 9 on August 27th. If you go to justshootitpod.com/office hours, you can learn more about what we're doing and sign up there.
With that said, if you do want to become a patron, ASAP, you can go to patreon.com/justshootitpod. And if you don't, then just hang out, do whatever you want, listen to the podcast.
I am sending a ton of stickers today, basically. So if you don't get your sticker, or if you want to get a sticker, they're going to be coming a lot faster and a lot sooner. And I think we're going to restructure our Patreon tiers a little bit more so that people get a little bit more access to the cool stuff that we're trying to offer. And it's just a little bit easier to understand and wrap your head around.
We're renaming it Patreon Tears of Joy. So come check
Delicious.
it out. Patreon.com/justshootitpod. And with that, let's talk to Eugene Kotlyarenko. Thanks for joining us. Congrats on the film.
Thanks.
Sundance 2020.
Yeah.
Squeaked in there pre-pandemic.
I mean, I think that was maybe the last film festival, maybe Berlin, that didn't really have to consider, the worldwide global crisis that has defined our year, along with, other amazing and horrific things that have happened.
Yeah. So can you tell us about Spree, the logline?
Right. So Spree, the logline is that Spree will become the new thing that defines 2020. Once Spree comes out, and I guess people listening, it's already out, we'll be like, whoa, we got to start talking about this one instead of stupid COVID. It's a social media critique. It's a comedy. It's a horror film. It is about a rideshare driver named Kurt Kunkel who is desperate for social media following. And so he decides to go viral by live streaming a murderous rampage.
I think it's important to point out it's sort of a new version of like a found footage film, right? In that it's kind of all shot through GoPros or surveillance footage a couple times, but mostly GoPros and cell phone footage.
Yeah. I mean, he... conceptually, that is foregrounded in the storytelling, right? So he is presenting this tutorial as a live stream, right? So, I mean, this isn't a spoiler at the beginning of the film. He sets up his cameras and you're introduced to his sort of like technical setup, which then the film is presented through that mode.
And it's even like a plot point at a certain... Like there's a few instances where like a camera will like fall off of a window or something like that, and it affects the way that not only the story unfolds, but the way that we see it.
Yeah. My first movie 10 years ago is called Zeros and Ones, and that was a film about a guy who loses his computer and has to figure out who stole it. And that entire film was told through operating system and computer apps and programs and websites and stuff, and sort of trying to use the language of a computer to tell that story. However, it wasn't conceptually and integrated into the characters, right? So thematically it made sense to tell it through the computer language, but the characters themselves weren't like presenting the story through their own devices. I mean, this is 2010 is the era when like people first started embedding like YouTube or Daily Motion or something. So it's a much more primitive technologically era. You didn't even really you had the earliest smartphones when we shot that movie in 2008. Anyway, so I've sort of dabbled in that sort of stuff since that first film. I did also make a film that year called Skydiver, which was all through webcam conversations through Skype and GChat. So kind of like what we're doing on Zoom, but 10 years ago. And so in that, I found a mode where it was very clearly about the webcam conversations. And I've sort of dabbled in that stuff in my other films. And then when we got the idea for Spree, my co-writer and I, Gene McHugh, which was the idea of how scary it is to get into a rideshare with someone who might be psychotic. And when we started exploring what themes were driving that monstrous character, and naturally, I went towards like social media and sort of attention economy and the sort of thirst for relevance. And so when we settled on that as being the driving force for him, we decided we would have to present it in this, I mean, I guess you could really call it found footage 2.0 because it's presented as live. So almost like a high noon-ish thing, but like with found footage, I guess.
And some murder, I guess. There's murder in High Noon.
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah.
Right. So you were doing this way before, like, Searching, the John Cho movie. And,
Yeah.
What was the other one?
Unfriended.
Where it's like Unfriended, yeah.
So some of the people, so Zeros and Ones, very humble, independent film. A lot of people volunteered their time and energy because I think they were excited that, we were trying to do something really new. One of our VFX artists was the VFX supervisor on Unfriended. Someone that I worked with closely editing that project and a few others became the editor of Unfriended. So whether or not Timur Bekmambetov and kind of the Bazilev's team knows it, I think they do at this point. I've had a few meetings with them. A lot of people on their core team worked with me on Zeros and Ones basically 4 or 5 years before Unfriended.
What's so interesting to me about the process of doing these kind of screen share style movies is that immediately it creates an artifice that maybe prevents personality from coming through in the worst case scenario, right? And Spree, and I kind of assume probably all of your other movies from all the trailers and things that I've watched, are heavy on personality, heavy on point of view, heavy on, the quirk and humor and all of that. How do you approach such an artificial way of shooting and add that sort of perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all just comes from the filmmaker and what their intention is. So it's not inherently distancing. In fact, depending on your approach to it, it could be quite immersive. So like for me, I want to exploit the qualities of this, formal language that make people feel like they are watching something real. And I mean, a big part of what's horrifying about Spree is that when you're watching it, you really believe it could be happening. And so that's really important to me. In terms of character, I just like movies that have like entertainment value. I don't want the screen found footage, whatever thing, to be a gimmick, right? It has to be an extension of the character. So the way people use social media, right, actually it reflects in the storytelling because we all use it differently. And, the platforms are like this framework for us to then sort of, share our perspective or be, constrained from sharing our perspective. And that's something I'm thinking actually about for like another movie in the future. Like, how do those platforms actually become more important than how does the medium become the message in terms of how does it control what you are able and unable to say? Because that's something we really haven't explored, whether it be in film or just generally in culture. Like, these platforms and social media apps are very, very central in what we are and aren't allowed to express and how we express ourselves.
Oh, yeah. I just got in a fight with a friend because they said that I was not expressing myself enough on social media regarding a certain topic, it just seems kind of like the rules and expectations are changing like on a weekly basis.
Well, I think the thing that happened is over time, there's a few things that happened, but basically people have become conflated. Individuals have become conflated into brands. And so we hold individuals up to the same scrutiny we would hold up like corporations that are supposed to have ethics and corporations, we should be critical of them and hold them up to scrutiny. Human beings, I think, should be allowed to be a bit more flawed and a bit more imperfect. And we started treating corporations kind of like individuals, and that has, kind of morphed our sense of like what identity is in a way for ourselves. And so it's a really kind of troubling landscape in terms of like, you have to use these things to feel like you exist. Like, that's something that Kurt says, right? If you're not documenting yourself, you don't exist. And at the same time, the way these things make us feel about ourselves is really dehumanizing because we could become very statistically oriented, very immediate feedback oriented, and also start treating ourselves like, we strive for perfection, but in this sort of corporate mentality, branded mentality. And, that's a lot of what the film is about, but it is also a lot of what our lives are about now. And I'm sure as people who, have something that you plug or, are trying to promote or whatever, you have.
Yeah. By the way, we have a Patreon. Check it out.
Okay, exactly.
Patreon.com/
Like and subscribe, guys.
Well, yeah, I think so. Just to give people a little more context, Joe Keery, who is probably most known for playing Steve Harrington on Stranger Things, is the lead in Spree. And he's so good in it. And there is, like what you just said, if you're not on social media, you don't exist type of thing, which performing that idea it makes him sound like a psychopath, but it is really what so many people think. He's just kind of saying it out loud, you know.
It's rare for a character to get to state the theme and like his motivation so explicitly, right? Like, I am doing murder because I feel this way.
No, I mean, I think part of the trickiness, but also I think what's rewarding about watching Joe in this character is that Kurt Kunkel is so oblivious to the immoral horrors that he is enacting, you know, because he truly believes that by doing a tutorial, regardless of the content, just the idea of sharing a tutorial with the world is good, you know? And so
I would agree with that.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, prove me wrong, right? Sharing is great, you know, prove me wrong. Like, that's the Kurt Kunkel ethos. And so for him to very explicitly explore that, I think also digs into, you know, the thing about social media and a lot of the characters in the film, you know, his passengers and stuff, and his father, for instance, and even Jesse, who Sashir Zamata plays really brilliantly and who ostensibly is like the hero of the film, they believe that they are hiding their true intentions, whereas a viewer can really see how transparently they crave relevance and fame and, you know, virality and stuff. And Kurt, he's a monster, but you see yourself in him in a way because he's just able to sort of naively expose that thing that most people think they're hiding, right? Which is that they desperately want to be loved via likes and hearts and shit.
Right. You brought up the father character who's played by David Arquette. I love that character because you kind of like set him up to be this like stereotypical archetype of like the, you know, non-existent dad that's just a jerk and has whatever abuse problems and things. And not that he's not that, but the way he communicates with his son, I just like he like calls his son bro and stuff. And
he's very infantile, right? Like he's stunted in the same way that Kurt is, right?
Yeah. He's on the same level as Kurt. They just both want to be relevant. He maybe had a taste of relevance at some point because he was like a DJ who maybe had like went touring and stuff in the 90s. But in a way, maybe Kurt also feels like he had a taste of relevance because his quote-unquote best friend is this kid who used to babysit named Bobby, who's like this really successful influencer, who actually is played by Josh Ovi, who was a really successful Vine personality.
Oh, really? He was really... I mean, the whole cast is so good, and I like... I've been noticing this in movies lately. I was talking to Matt about this. They did this kind of in Palm Springs, too, where you have these like real archetypal characters, you know, where we've seen like a million times before, but you kind of create them in such detail and with like such unique relationships that it feels like something you've never seen before, even though you can like immediately understand their point of view.
Yeah,
you know?
Their function in the story.
Yeah, I think that has partly to do with satire and how satire works, where you want to pull up the archetypes, but then you also want to, you know, incorporate them to a very specific critique. At the same time, I appreciate you saying that. I do think the whole cast is really good. And what they brought to the film that maybe is just hinted at on the page is a sort of pathos, a sort of patheticness and sadness. Like David Arquette's character is really sad. I mean, it's funny to laugh at him.
It's heartbreaking. Yeah. Everyone's heartbreaking.
Even the kind of the scummy people in the first act of the film, like it's cringy to watch them, but you can sort of get like what they're driven by. And when you see yourself potentially reflected or some element of yourself reflected in those people, then it's inherently sad.
And just for a little more context, so Joe Keery's character is a spree driver, and spree is like the Uber of your world. And so he's picking up a bunch of despicable writers, as you would expect happens.
In LA all the time.
Yeah. And so I like that. That's kind of like the reverse kind of save the cat move, right? Which is like, instead of seeing him be super nice to someone, or help someone, you see him be not very nice to someone that deserves to be punished.
I think the reverse of the save the cat thing is like the, you know, protagonist or main character of the film would be a passenger with like a psychotic driver, right? The monster is not usually the one who is sort of like the vehicle for the story. And I don't really subscribe to any of those formulas and stuff, but I definitely wanted there on a moral level to play with the audience, to be like, hey, we kind of like-ish / cringe at this guy, but there's a certain like sad charisma to it. Then when you find out what he's doing, you're horrified. Oh, he's fucking, spoiler alert, fucking killing people. But the first few people suck. Like, you kind of revel in, you're okay with them dying. And then Jessie enters the scene basically at the end of the first act, and you really don't want her to suffer the way these people suffered. And also she gives you a breather from the formal qualities of the film, because for most of it you've been kind of claustrophobically contained in his GoPros in the car. And then, she breaks through that by kind of calling out her co-writer on her social media, IG story posts and stuff. And that's supposed to provide like a sort of visual breather for the audience, and also alert them to the fact that this character has her own POV, and we hope will survive and become important through the rest of the story.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and then kind of gives you an opportunity to branch out into other found footage streams or wherever the story takes you. But I didn't realize that is the first time that we kind of break out of that framework.
Yeah, you're probably in his car for about 15, 16 minutes straight. There's a few things, like there's the call from dad, which is like a FaceTime, so that sort of turns it into a split screen or whatever. But to really fully break out of the Kurt stream, you're introduced to Jessie.
Can I ask a little bit about the technicals?
Of course.
Right, because we've been talking so much about how great these performances are. And when we talk about Kurt's GoPros, which is still the majority of the film, I would say, or at least a meaningful part of it, it's like 8 cameras rigged to the car. Is that right?
So there's 1 in from the front, 1 out, and then 4 on the sides. Yep, 8. Then 1 in from the back and 1 out from the back. So it's 8.
And what's awesome is because Kurt's character is recording everything in the car and streaming this live, you can show other cameras in your camera feed.
Yeah, so
right?
For sure. So it was a really tricky setup that Jeff Cohen, our DP, figured out with his team. One, these cameras are not meant to shoot features on.
Were they really GoPros?
They were truly GoPros, and they were
the Hero?
Hero 4 or something, and they were overheating in the sun as we drove around LA.
And you're running for hours on top.
So you couldn't run for hours. You could run for 20 to 30 minutes before they crapped out, which is still actually a lot of time for, actors to do the scene again and again. We'd probably get between 3 and 6 takes, depending on the length of the scene. And, myself and other crew members are in a follow van, and we have a walkie hidden in the car, and we also have a antenna that's sending the GoPro signal.
You're seeing all 8 cameras?
Well, we put it into a splitter, and we got 4 cameras because we didn't need all 8. I wanted the front cam, I wanted a back cam, I wanted the Kurt sort of side view angle. So those 3 for sure, and then I don't really know. We kept changing what the 4th angle was, more or less. But yeah, the sort of main angles where I could see the performances were important to have. And, those would crap out every once in a while too. But the audio, which, I can usually read performance through audio, was good enough.
Yeah, the camera's not moving, right? So as long as,
Exactly. The camera is fixed. So unless they were in front of like some really awesome like drive-by footage, it really wouldn't be that different. There's interesting... The way that light played on people's faces and stuff was interesting, if not headache inducing in the edit, but oftentimes interesting. Yeah, so I would be able to give notes between takes through the walkie, and we kind of shot it like that.
And were you on a process trailer, or were the actors driving themselves?
It was a mix. Joe was driving a lot of the time, which is really unique and amazing. I mean, people will see the film, they will see his performance. His performance is excellent. What they probably won't know is that he was actually driving a lot of the time. If you don't know anything about Hollywood, you'll assume he's driving the whole movie. And if you do know anything about filmmaking, you'll assume it's on a process trailer or on a biscuit or something the whole time. And it was probably 60 Joe driving, 40 biscuit, process trailer, stunt driver. Maybe a little bit more, like 70-30. Joe was really great being able to pull off these performances while making left turns and getting on the freeway and all sorts of stuff that, God bless, turned out to be extremely safe.
Pretty awesome.
And the other thing they won't know that, it's not really explicitly about the technical, but Joe's an amazing improver, and all the actors were. And, the ideal version of this film is like you have a take, and you can cut between the 8 angles and just use that single take. And that happened very rarely. So we were cutting between takes and between angles, and we kind of were able to get away with some stuff, but the improvising, makes that more tricky. So Ben Smith, our editor, we had to come up with this language together, because you want this to be number one, entertaining, number two, coherent and clear, and number three, fast paced, while you're still presenting a really unique visual language, right? Like this, there's no normal coverage in this movie. There's no master shots. There's no crane shots. There's no tracking shots. You are stuck in a very, I don't want to say unprecedented, but unique language.
So you mentioned the pacing. I kind of wanted to come back again, like for listeners that obviously haven't seen the movie, and I want to make sure people aren't too lost about the specifics we're talking about. But I think for listeners, they've heard like found footage film, kind of, right? That type of idea. They've heard a horror film, and then basically the philosophical stuff, which is like kind of very Black Mirror-ish. And so it's kind of these three different types of films that are put together. And to me, like what seems to really be the spackle that makes the whole thing work is the soundtrack, which is just so intense and so crazy. And you mentioned the pacing, it goes so fast. Usually, like when I see a movie that has so much music, I'm like bothered by it a little bit. But for some reason in your movie, it just kind of seemed to drive me exactly where I need to be, and created. Sometimes you would have a scene that I think if I just saw with no music, it would just seem like a normal scene. A guy's driving some people, but then he puts on this music that the character has made himself, and it is just like so psychotic. Can you tell us about the music a little bit, and when do you start thinking about the music in your filmmaking process?
So it was actually really unique for this film. I collaborated with two different composers on the score of the film. One is named James Ferraro, and I spoke to James about the movie during the scripting stage and introduced him to my concept for the character. I had a cringe compilation that I made for Joe to see kind of what the origins of Kurt as a wannabe influencer are, and I sent that to James as well, and I sent him the script.
Wait, what do you mean by cringe compilation? Like music that
No.
makes people uncomfortable?
No. It was a compilation of videos of people who were desperate to be relevant on social media, or desperate to sort of like be cool, and exposed a part of themselves that was really hard to watch and easy to make fun of. And that
like this is like real
that's
stuff,
a real
basically.
yeah that's just sort of edit I put together, like that's a reference point for Joe.
How did you find those people?
You just go through the web. Some of them are videos that have already gone viral because they are so cringy, and others are just, you search for things that have less than 10 views. You organize by lack of views on a subject matter, like going viral tutorial. You search that, and then you do newest. And the newest, it's not by popularity. And there you will find a lot of people who, the irony, right, is like Kurt, is you don't have any followers and you're offering people a tutorial about how to get followers. Like there's a lot of people who do that.
It's like the girl from 8th grade a little bit, right? She's kind of doing that.
Yeah,
obviously that's like the non-psychotic version, but
yeah, for every influencer you've heard of, there's literally 10,000, if not 100,000 people around the world trying to do literally the exact same shtick that those influencers do, the exact same subject matter, the exact same vibe, and they just suck at it, or they don't have the je ne sais quoi or whatever. And I just thought it would be more interesting to make a movie about those wannabes, because it's a sad state of affairs for our world, and all we're getting is kind of the tip of the iceberg success stories, But anyway, so I shared that cringe compilation with James Ferraro, and based on that, I said, I want you to make music that Kurt could make. I want you to make Kurt's music, and he is this type of person, and this is what
it limits the number of tools that he has.
Exactly.
Right? It limits his resources and his influences
and
as well.
also just the
really
skill
great.
level, right? It's based on very simplistic beats, repeated many times over. But at the same,
probably canned beats even. Like, is it something
there
where he's
were
pulling
canned
like
things?
library
Yeah, he came
samples
up with
and
a
stuff?
palette. They called it the Kurt palette. And then the real challenge, though, for him, and then our composer in post, Mason Ware, was. And, while the music has to be cringy and kind of simplistic and kind of bad, it also has to drive forward the film and be propulsive and be kind of good at the same time that it's bad. And that's a really difficult thing to accomplish. That is something that we went through many iterations of songs. And so anyway, James came up with his songs before principal photography began. So Joe was able to use those as the sort of Kurt soundtrack in his mind. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was super helpful, I think, for Joe. And then when we got into the edit, they didn't exactly work for keeping the story going. And so then that's when I started working with James Moore and with Mason to come up with new songs that kind of could really drive forward the film and still be Kurt and bad. And so the final score and soundtrack is a combination of the songs from before we made the movie and the ones during the edit process.
Yeah, I think it's literally, it seems like maybe easy, but it seems incredibly complicated to make that perfect song that, you know, if somebody played it for you and told you they made it, there's a high chance they're about to murder you.
Yeah, that's the Kurt vibe. And I have to say, working closely with Mason once we had our edit was really, really fun. And he just sort of started, there was a certain point when he just sort of started cracking it. And it was really good. Like the flow was really good. But he still initially had very much the same problems that James kind of had when he was trying to wrap his head around Kurt, which was, how do I make something that's like really bad and basic and because as a musician, you want to make the best possible music for the film.
Yeah, you spent your whole life branching out from the tools,
figuring out
Kurt
how to
would
be
have.
good, and now almost like Joe, because Kurt is a performer, right? So Joe had to become a bad performer, which is one of the hardest things you can do as an actor, I think, be bad on purpose. As a musician, they had to become bad musicians, which, was a performance in itself, right?
Yeah, and art and stuff is a muscle, as much as it is like a talent and like a thought process that I've found in my things. If I need like, can we get some drawings from kids that look bad, sometimes like the art person will use their left hand or something, but a lot of times like you can't really get anything good unless you find a kid to draw it,
Speaking of that,
it's hard to make bad art.
The beginning of the film, starts with a bunch of Kurt's social media attempts at social media, content, which revolves around this Draw My Life meme video, right? Where he kind of gives his autobiography through a whiteboard drawing and narration. And that really was Joe drawing that stuff. And that was a big part of our preparatory process too, where Joe and I made the Kurt videos ahead of time, like a couple of months before the shoot. And we just used them as exercises to help him get into character. And then during the edit, Ben and myself and some of the producers started talking, and we were like, well, I always wanted to use it, but I didn't know how to use it in the final product. And then when we started thinking about what is a really strong intro for the film, that's when we started incorporating those exercises that Joe did to get into character as, the materials to get the viewer into the world of the film.
Yeah, it's great exposition, right? Like what a gift to have, your characters explaining exactly who they are in a really efficient and clean way. That's great.
Well, speaking of Joe and your whole cast, Sashir, and you have Kyle Mooney in there, and obviously David Arquette and Misha Barton, and the rest of the cast is also great as well. How do you, I know, which number movie is this for you? 6?
This would be probably 5.
5. And I know you've done a lot of kind of art stuff and music videos and commercials and stuff in between.
No commercials.
Oh, really?
No commercials.
You're like, I hate
money.
No,
is that really like intentional?
No, I don't hate money. I've actually spent the last 13 to 14 years, my adult life basically being extremely broke. But I just haven't done commercials because if your heart's not in it, you're not going to do a good job or something. And all of the pitches that I did, my heart was in those pitches, and they're just never picked because you're competing with people who maybe don't have that attitude towards their work or something, or just want to appease a product, And obviously there are people who can balance this sort of this is my vibe and this is what's best for the product, and God bless those people, whatever. But, I really wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, I think, to me, just Matt and I both do a lot of commercials. So just
bless you guys.
My point of view on it is part
worries.
of the skill of being a commercial director is finding your way into things that seem to have zero appeal at first look. And whether it's a visual thing or whether it's we both do mainly comedy, a comedic moment or a casting thing.
It's how do you love dolphin harpoons are really hard, but I figured it out. I cracked it. Nuclear waste.
We need more of that.
I think is really.
How do we do?
And actually, the campaign really blew up for me.
Yeah,
because,
look, I don't.
Matt did,
Look, we're all complicit in these
That's okay.
systems, right? Like we all exist under capitalism or late capitalism. Like we all pay fucking rent and need to eat and all this stuff. Like, so why not use your skill set to survive? You know, and like, luckily I fucking worked as an editor at Condé Nast for 9 months, you know, and the whole cycle of my life throughout my 20s and up until basically this film, and who knows, I may have to go back to it. We'll see what happens to the movie. Is like you work for fucking a year or 9 months, some stupid corporate job, and hopefully you write a script while you're doing that, and then you have enough money saved up if you eat enough, like cheaply and your rent stays under 4 figures, that you can go out and pitch that script that you have with a deck or whatever. And what happened with my previous 2 films, actually all of my films more or less besides my first one in Spree, is you're not going to get the money for your script, and then you're running out of time, and you only have 3 months until you run out of money, and like, what can you do with no resources with your friends? And so, you know, Wobble Palace and A Wonderful Cloud and Feast of Burden, which are like the previous 3 projects, were made basically for almost no money with my friends, and were shot in 7 days and were edited in a month and a half. And then, you know, those 2 films premiered at South by, and they played New York, LA, and blah, blah, blah. So, and then I would have to go back to doing horrible jobs.
Anyway, before we derailed my question, I was asking you basically about how you got this cast. You know, I saw Drake as a producer. Is that the Drake? There is no last name.
Drake, yeah, is the producer. And I know this isn't like obviously a political podcast. It's like a filmmaking podcast. But I do think...
Hey, we are happy to get into it. I actually rather enjoy it.
I think everyone has these thoughts on their mind, or, you know, their relationship with social media on their mind. So I don't think it'll be boring to people, even though it might sound like I'm beating the drum or something.
To me, it's inspiring to see that the things that are driving you crazy in your life, aside from unrelated to film, can inspire your art, you know? I like that.
Well, and also, you know, this isn't the first rideshare movie, right? And so, like, what makes this movie special or stand out or unique, right, is this thought process, right? The mechanics of, oh, we've got a character who has a revolving door of different people coming into their car every time. That's an obvious story mechanic. There's a lot of opportunity there, right? And we've seen the whole spectrum of, you know, quote unquote success or quality as from ideas that came from that seed, basically, right? And so I think that understanding your thought process and your philosophies as applied to that story mechanic, I think, is how you get Spree. And that's really
Matt and I talked before we started talking to you about how, I mean, we get emailed trailers and things, and people try to come on the podcast all the time. We've seen like some version of this movie, of this, not the movie, but the engine, you know, an Uber driver picking people up. We've even had like a couple filmmakers on that have made movies like that. But your movie is like, we're like, wow, this is it. You could make a really bad version of this movie, but this is like probably the best version of this type of story that you could make. And it's obviously you're an experienced filmmaker, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it beyond just it being cool, but like what it's about.
Wouldn't it be cool if he did murders?
And the technical stuff is really beyond, like, people might hear GoPro, but this does not feel like a movie that is like pulling punches. I mean, you know, people get run over.
For sure. That's something we considered too when we were writing the script. I was like, okay, well, this first ride, it's going to be, even though there's like a twist in it pretty early on, it's going to be kind of dialogue heavy. So we need to put a stunt in there in the first ride to indicate to people this isn't going to be like some cheapy movie, because there's a bunch of shit that happens later that's like, I mean, we shut the fucking freeway down, right? We did stunts on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, we trained dogs to kill people, so it's not like, you know, some like
so that's a real dog killing a person.
Exactly, we trained dogs to kill real people, and so rest in peace. No animals or human beings were hurt in the making of this film, and that's 100% true. But Yeah, no, I mean, like, look, the movies, I made a reference list, obviously. There's a few different references you make, right? When you try to pitch the movie, you tell people it's like Taxi Driver 2.0 or something, right? But for myself...
What was the Jake Gyllenhaal movie? Nightcrawler?
Nightcrawler, right? Like Nightcrawler, but about social media or something.
A little bit of Natural Born Killers in there as well.
Yeah, Natural Born Killers, like violent media critique. I mean, for Nightcrawler, I saw that film and I was like, I really like this film, but like, it's telling me that it's from 2011, but it literally takes place in 1994 in a way. Like the preoccupations and the way the characters behave and the values are very 1994, like chasing like stuff for news media or something. And so, yeah, it is a little bit like that was definitely on my mind. But in terms of horror movies, one thing that was really inspirational was Jafar Panahi, this Iranian filmmaker who's been banned from making movies by the government. He made a movie called Taxi Tehran, which was all done in his car. He basically is like a sort of underground taxi driver and going around picking people up. And you really can't tell whether it's fake or real. And people recognize him as a filmmaker. It's a very interesting film.
Even like Taxi Cab Confessions, right? I feel like is one of the old...
That was a reference point.
There's also something about because it's on GoPros and iPhones, and it all feels so real. You have an obligation in terms of stunts and in terms of VFX to really make it feel as photoreal as the rest of the film. Like there's no heightened kind of aspect to the way that you do any of the performances or stunts or anything like that, Yeah,
except, I mean, this is, I don't want to spoil it, but like in the transition from the second act to the third act, I mean, there's a certain point in the movie where you might think Kurt is dead. Well, he isn't. And to me,
I was actually curious, did you cut any kind of time in between?
But to me, that was like almost a way subconsciously to have a viewer be like, okay, he's back from the dead. This guy's a fucking monster now. Because if in act one, you're kind of enjoying the fact that he's killing these motherfuckers who are his passengers, and in act two, you feel scared about like where this is headed. In act three, when he basically is not dead, rises from the dead, he's a fucking monster. And everything he does in act three is really monstrous. And I definitely
want... He's Michael Myers now.
Exactly. Yeah. He's Michael Myers.
Yeah, that's fun.
And I wanted people to be really scared about what he's doing from the get-go is horrifying, but your feelings towards the character sort of morph over time. And so by act three, I just really wanted everyone to be like, this is so fucking fucked up, because that is how, whatever the movie has themes that it's exploring, right? And that's one of them.
Can I ask one more sort of kind of technical filmmaking question? Because I think it would be easy to underestimate this movie because it all looks so natural. But if you watch the credits, you've got a full crew. Like you said, you shut down the freeway. Obviously, you're not doing these things for real. But tell us a little bit about the work you put into making it feel authentic, even though you needed the control of a filmmaker.
So look, like we were saying, like the fact that Joe's driving a lot of the time helps. The fact that the actors can do entire takes without being interrupted helps because it allows them to really be in it. And one thing that I knew was going to be integral to the film, but had a hard time having people take the leap of faith, is the comments. So when you watch the film, there's tons and tons of comments, especially in the second half of the film, on his live stream. And so I spent many, many nights and weekends writing all of these fake comments. There's over 7,000 comments in the film. And then, we had an animator animate them on. And if you pause the movie at any point, it will feel pretty realistic what the people are saying about Kurt and the live stream and all of that. And I think that does contribute a big part to the realism of the film. Like, the graphic design and sort of integration of these apps into the storytelling. I mean, people, I don't know why people, when I pitched this movie to a lot of different production companies, they didn't go for it because I think people are scared of things that are new. But it's not, the viewers are not scared of new things. As long as it's like entertaining and believable, they want to see films that are pushing the boundaries and that reflect the visual language that they're used to from their phones and from their computers and shit. So that all had to feel really real to me while still feeling kind of like easy to make fun of, right? Because at the end of the day, the movie is comedic and it's trying to make fun of all of these quote unquote realistic things that we do or the ways we use our technology and shit.
Right. I think those companies passed on your movie probably because it's like clearly execution dependent. Like we've all seen, even Breaking Bad. You remember when like Jesse goes on MyFace and like .com in the first episode? It just like instantly pulls you out because it's like such a fake website. And your entire movie is based on all these interfaces and applications and sound effects and things that like can easily just be cheesy, you know? But I don't know, like what you said, you spent hours writing 7,000 comments. A lot of people would have the art department or the graphic design people do it, or like get a PA or an assistant and say, hey, can you just like write a bunch of comments? And the fact that like you spent the time to do that, I'm curious like about the rest of the interfaces and who designed the Spree app and all that stuff. Like,
yeah, so there was a
like,
few people.
How important is that?
Really important, right? So the Spree app was designed by Teddy Blanks, who is a graphic designer and poster designer that I've worked with many times before. And he did that before the film, so that, you know, the part where Kurt kind of shows you his phone and it rates himself 5 stars and all that, that was actually in his phone. We didn't composite that. And I thought it would be really important for Joe to have that interaction into the GoPro.
Is that part of your pitch when you're pitching the movie? Like you're like, here's what it looks like. And
well, no, we
like.
got that after we got the budget and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, that was designed by Teddy. And then really it was just mostly 2 other people. Eli Susser did a lot of the motion design. So like the car picking up, the Spree car picking someone up, or the end montage. That's an extremely difficult and labor-intensive thing to design and animate. But like, there's a lot of animation, and then Trevor Clifford did all of the comment animation and some of the other app design interaction. And
you even have to figure out, like, it's part of the cinematic language of this movie, like how you split screen comments and apps and when you cut to what, and if he's looking at something, if you see that text on the screen, or if you cut to, but you don't have an insert. You don't have insert shots. The insert shots are him showing the phone to the camera.
Yeah, there's no, but even that's not an insert shot. Yeah, exactly. That's part of the mise en scène. Like, you're not cutting away. So yeah, I mean, there are ways, obviously, through the 8 angles of the GoPros that we were able to jump coverage, you know, and kind of hide things. A really useful one was pointing the camera forward onto the road. So when we had to jump something that was in the script but ultimately didn't work well for the final product of the film, we used that as a kind of our go-to. But yeah, you have to be creative. Like, I mean, if you limit yourself to a visual language, one, that hasn't been done yet. One, you can create whatever thing makes sense to you, but at the same time, you know, you have a lot of obstacles and a lot of constraints. And so just figuring out ways to turn those obstacles into creative opportunities is what's part of the fun of this filmmaking, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. I asked this question a while ago, but we never got to it. But can you tell us about the cast real quick?
Yeah, super. So this is my first time working with a casting director, Rebecca Deely, and she was really awesome. And, you know, she set up a lot of meetings for me, especially for the Kurt and Jesse characters. And
did you already have money when you hired the casting director? Like, you already had the budget and stuff?
Had half of the budget.
So it wasn't, your budget was not dependent on getting a certain actor?
No, it was not, because the 2 people who came on for the film, one of them had never invested in a film before, and this was going to be their first film, and he had seen my other movies and I wanted to get into movies for a long time, and I pitched him the story. He got it right away. He had some ideas of who he wanted for the lead, and I had those conversations with him, but I said,
like, Tom Cruise is...
No, he had reasonable suggestions, but, you know, once I met Joe, it really, really clicked with him. And you know, at the end of the day, that EP trusted me. And then along the way, we got involved with Dream Crew and Drake. Dream Crew is Drake's production company.
How did you get involved with him?
So one of the 30 meetings I had with creative execs was at Annapurna. And the exec I met with there her name is Sumaya Kave. And she'd seen my previous films and we had been sort of friendly. And she was really into Spree, and she really went hard trying to pitch it there at Annapurna, and, you know, it didn't work out ultimately. And then she sort of went independent and formed a company with another Annapurna colleague she had named Matt Budman. So their company, Forest Hill, ended up having a first look deal with Drake's company, Dream Crew. And so this was the first project that they brought to Dream Crew. And the team at Dream Crew was really receptive, and they totally got, like, it as a social media critique, which, a lot of the companies I met with really wanted it to lean in harder into horror elements and thriller
Right. Sorry
elements.
to keep interrupting, but so do you pitch it to Annapurna, then you pitch it to Forest Hill, then you pitch it to Drake's
Yeah, I
company?
did all those as
What's
pitch.
the time frame from that, kind of like those first 30 meetings?
So the meetings really picked up in earnest after my previous film, Wobble Palace, premiered at South by, so March 2018. Even though my co-writer and I had been working on the script for probably at that point on and off for 2 years. And I'd had maybe some earlier meetings in between there, but they weren't.
And you'd had a couple other South by premieres too.
Yeah, before that,
Right,
A Wonderful
yeah.
Cloud had premiered at South by. Anyway, so after South by 2018, I went to a bunch of meetings, probably from March until September. Somewhere in there, maybe in April, I met with Sumaya. She really tried to push it through Annapurna, probably for a month or two. Didn't exactly happen. And then in September is when I met the first EP of the film, Spacemaker Productions, that's what they're called. So in September, we tried to negotiate that deal, and we did. And then I think Forest Hill came into being around, October, November 2018.
That's pretty serendipitous, right? Like, that's a long road, but it happens relatively quickly.
No, I mean, it's lucky. I mean, every film, you just have to work really hard and grind and have a good product and really believe in it. And like, what helps me is like, I just know that like the films I'm making, even if they're not, to me, they feel like unique and not derivative. And I never want to do anything that already kind of exists. And I think that is a way to not even in like a manipulative way, in a really authentic way, inspire people who are not jaded by the industry or who don't already have their own agenda. And so in that, I'm lucky that Spacemaker and Dream Crew, while they obviously have certain goals and a certain vibe and a certain themes that they want to explore in their filmmaking, were, I think, inspired by, me wanting to do something unique and different and stuff. So yeah, so then I pitched to Matt and Sumaya again, knowing that we had some money, which is helpful, and knowing that, they kind of came on board, then we got the casting director. And then once they came on board, but before Dream Crew and Drake, we got the casting director, we put the cast together with the help of Rebecca and our other producer, John Lang. And then we kind of repitched that to Dream Crew, and they were very receptive. And what's so cool is that one of the people at Dream Crew, Matt Babel, I showed him the Draw My Life thing that Joe and I had made. He's like, we're going to use this to market the shit out of this movie. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd like to incorporate it in the movie. I'd like to use it for promotion, blah, blah. And when it came down to it, that would be now 15 months later, or maybe even more, I don't know, so definitely over a year and a half later, that's what we did. So we've been doing this promotional campaign for the last 3.5 weeks of Kurt's World 96 on Instagram. And it has gone viral, unlike Kurt at the beginning of the film. And we used a lot of the Joe preparatory material, and we shot a little bit more once we were starting to count and during the film. And if you look at it, you would never know that we shot it just in basically like session. It just feels really real and like it's being presented live every day. And it's almost like I'm making a second movie right now to promote the film. It's like secondary cinematic, extended cinematic universe material. But we did, for instance, a live stream. So one of the cool things is that Joe and David Arquette, they'd never met before. So a week before the movie principal photography began, I wanted them to go out on the town as father and son. And I said, why don't we film it? So Joe filmed a bunch of it, and I was filming too. And we were swapping the phone, filming live. And, we went to get dinner, and we went to a bar, and we went to, randomly, David got a phone call from someone that he had made a music video with in the 90s. So in character as Chris Kunkel, the washed up 90s DJ, we went to this house to watch a Chris Kunkel music video, which was really a David Arquette music video. And Kurt, Joe, the whole time he's in character as Kurt, is like, is this what was cool in the 90s, Dad? Or, he does a review of a Thai iced tea, in character and stuff. And it was all super amazing character building. And honestly, at that point, I was like, fuck it. I'm just gonna shoot the movie like this. Forget the crew and everything. I mean, this was because the realism and the sort of voyeurism I was experiencing as a filmmaker, being amongst these two actors and how good they were at improvising. I was like, fuck, this is the movie. And if the movie doesn't feel as real as this, I will fucking kill myself. I will feel really disappointed that like the preparatory materials were better than the movie. But ultimately the movie turned out, I think, as real. But we used that stuff really intensively in this promo campaign. So Dream Crew got it. All of this is just to say Dream Crew got it right away. And they got behind the film, and it was super good. Like, you know, I got very little notes on the film from either of the EPs.
Yeah, I think it's a great version of a story, because I think so many people, when they're starting out, they're like, well, I've got this script. Now I just need a casting director. So I can find a lead, so I can attach them, so I can get the money. And it's like, it just almost never, ever happens that way, because, you know, attaching people with no money and no start date and paying a casting director. I mean, it's just like, I think the way you describe it, and obviously you have experience of putting together movies, is like a good lesson, I think, to our listeners of how you have a lot of meetings and all these kind of building blocks that it's not like you are stacking blocks on top of each other. It's like you're building like a base of blocks, and then you're like putting a few more blocks on top, and then eventually something will like get to a finished film.
Yeah, and I think even on top of that, there's a lot of the ideas that you implemented of like going out and like doing these character exercises and actually shooting them, and, you know, all of that stuff that can feel, you know, if you let yourself get caught up in, you know, your own ego, can feel maybe a little silly or futile or just off base somehow. But obviously, they're, again, the building blocks of what made the movie feel real, and then kind of paid dividends as well. You know, like just going for it, just shooting it is what got you, you know, this viral campaign that's going to help this movie.
I would say what you just said, just going for it and shooting it. And like, I mean, this is a prime example. Obviously, we had a budget. Obviously, it was more than my other films by far. But the same ethos that I applied to those other films is what I applied to this. No one is going to want to fucking make your movie more than you. So like, you have to put your heart and soul into making it. And if people aren't giving you money or permission, you have to find resources to do it without money, or you have to give yourself the permission to just sort of dive in and do it. And then when people see that you're already doing it, that's when they'll come on board. That's when people are more confident to come on board. When they see that, hey, this guy doesn't mind shooting on a fucking iPhone, this stuff. And because the actors respond well to the script, they're down to do it on an iPhone with him. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we should support this, because like if he's so confident about this and they're so confident about this, then maybe there's something there.
Yeah, how awesome is it to be in a meeting with an investor and say, oh, by the way, here's like some thing that we shot for the character, and it's like already you feel it. You're, you know, showing a tone and a feeling and an excitement and a confidence, and you're not, you know, pretentious. Like, you're artistic, but incredibly unpretentious in that you don't care about the tools or the money. You just care about what you're making, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the story dictates it too, right? So if you're going to do, you know, I mean, I always think it's actually kind of shitty when like Michael Bay or something is using GoPros for their little like action, like split-second action shots or whatever, because that's not justified by the story. But in this specific case, of course, it is justified. And if you find yourself to be a filmmaker who cannot get money to make a film, like most filmmakers can't when they're starting out, there is nothing preventing you from coming up with a story that makes sense with an iPhone or a Zoom call. Obviously, when COVID began, like, I just like the feeling of like, bleh, like how many people in LA are making their Zoom movie right now or writing their COVID script. But like a really, I think, filmmaker who challenges themselves to do something that's resourceful and unique and original should find ways to tell a story through Zoom or through iPhones. And anyone who says like, oh, I can't make my movie because I can't find the money is like, you know, look, you need money to survive, so come up with a strategy to make money to survive. But you kind of don't need money to make a movie, really, if you know how to edit and if you could find cool people who are, you know, you don't even have to find actors. Most of my other movies don't have established actors. They have people in my life that I thought were good performers from watching them perform on social media, who are like in my network of friends. And I'm like, oh, I can just tell this person is a good performer. So I'm going to hit them up and see if they want to shoot something for 7 days, you know, and some of those people have become actors after that. And that's awesome. But I think, you know, don't let anything stop you from making your movie, because the resources to do what we consider a film, which is like, you know, documentation, a 4K documentation tool is called an iPhone or any sort of smartphone. And the things you need to edit, which used to be so burdensome, like during the edit of Spree, I was reading a book called Final Cut, which is like interviews with editors from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Just the technical process of editing in that era was so grueling and so complicated and so physical. And now, we have all these NLEs from Premiere to Final Cut to whatever you want to use. Even on your fucking phone, you could edit a movie if you really were into it. So, I mean, nothing should really stop a contemporary filmmaker from making the film they want, as long as they can keep their lack of resources and kind of limitations in mind.
Well, I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you one last question. So your movie is like very violent, right? When you're directing the actors and it feels real and feels authentic and people are into it, like, do you ever feel weird saying?
Well, I think our approach to this, and I think Gene and I, my co-writer, and then Joe and I, when we were coming up with the character, were very sensitive to the portrayal of violence in this film, because there is violence in the real world. And, beyond the social media critique, I mean, a big impetus for this film is I wanted to make fun of white male mass murderers, because I don't think that I have seen media make fun of them. I have seen a really good president go up and say, we need gun control, we need mental health care. I have seen the New York Times and other publications come up with a psychological or socioeconomic critique or origin of why someone would go out and do that. But a good president and a good publication cannot make fun of these people. And I do think this film does not make the violence cool. I don't think there is aesthetically, if you look at a movie like Natural Born Killers or something, or even Joker, the violence feels kind of empowering or cool or something you'd want to emulate. I mean, Kurt,
or even just sensational.
Or sensational. Here it's kind of detached. And Kurt is a very cringy character. He's not someone that you would want to emulate. He's not oh, cool, all of a sudden, once he starts committing violence. So to me, that was the sort of approach that I took in the writing and also with the crew and with the cast of look, we are doing this to, one, make fun of this type of person, and two, to not make the violence feel cool. And Joe explicitly was very uncool in the movie, even though there is something you see of yourself in him. And so inevitably you kind of want to like him or something. He's not cool. So
he is a movie star, though, which is a complicated thing, right? He's got that it factor. And I think it's really funny, the thing that maybe Joe was most famous for in Stranger Things is his hair. And you very clearly make it look so dumb. And it's obviously I was oh man, this is such a good move, but it's slicked down. It's
the exact opposite of the Steve Harrington hair.
I would love to do horror films, but I feel like I'm not good at directing cringeworthy things, because I'm oh, that's gross, and I feel like part of you have to somehow get into a mind space where you're yeah, kill him, or just kind of, or do you not? Or is it all technical and you're well, then you're going to do this and this and this? Okay, just...
Yeah, it is pretty technical. For instance, the scene where he confronts Bobby at his doorstep.
Oh, yeah, that was
extremely technical because Bobby is wearing a body cam that we had to kind of invent and sew into his clothes. And it was extremely cumbersome. And then we were you're not getting the right angle, Josh. You have to tilt your body a certain way. And then that's a retractable knife, but everything has to be real. So there's that's actually has very, complicated coverage that we knew was going to be broken up into multiple takes and angles and stuff. Even though it's invisible because it's a split screen that quote unquote never cuts. So, it's very technical. And same thing with the dogs, where the dogs attack, that was its own sort of technical, I don't want to say nightmare, but huge challenge, because everything in the junkyard we had to do in one day. And it's basically 3 different
And it's night.
And those dogs are for real. Those dogs are not acting. They are headed for whatever they're in.
They are acting. I mean, they were trained to run up the car.
Yeah,
but I guess their aggression feels real.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean it feels real. But there's trainers and stuff. I mean, that was weirdly one of the most expensive things, training the dogs. I had no idea how expensive that would be. And so it is really technical, but obviously even it being technical, you still have to have the right, I think, when you engage in violence in films, is there a reason for this beyond the sort of just sensationalism of it? And I think, probably even those movies like American Psycho or Natural Born Killers or something like that could mount a valid defense. But even beyond the defense of like we're critiquing violence, I just wanted to make sure that the violence didn't feel cool. And I think
even if you were to misinterpret your film, no one's ever like, oh, I want to be that guy, in a way that, like, you know, maybe there's a deranged person who would feel that way about this.
That's exactly my intention, because I think even when a good president talks about a horrific act and a horrible person, and the New York Times talks about a horrific act and a horrible person, there can be someone who looks at those things and say, hey, this person speaks to me. And I just wanted to make a character that we could really, for lack of a better word, like shit on, like make fun of. And, you know, and even though I also wanted that person, people to see themselves in that person's behavior a little bit, because like we've all want attention on social media, blah, blah, blah. I just didn't want him to be cool, you know?
Yeah. Wow. Well, cool. Well, this has been awesome. We've been talking to you for much longer than we usually talk, because it's so fascinating. We could probably spend another couple hours, but yeah, maybe we'll have you back on in the future. I'm really curious to see how the transmedia stuff affects the release, in addition with COVID and everything. Where can people watch your movie?
So on August 14th, it will come out on VOD, iTunes, Amazon, all cable on demand, and simultaneously in drive-ins across the country.
Oh, fun. That's great. What a
for
great
the movie,
drive-in.
right? Because you're in the car watching in the car.
We had these guys, The Wretched. They made the movie The Wretched.
Oh, yeah.
And their movie was like #1 in the box office for like
hey,
weekends.
You know, that would be a dream.
Yeah, I feel good about Spree.
Are you? Well, I hope you're right, knock on wood, because I would really like people to be talking about the film. It's not really even about like the number of rentals. I just wanted to make some sort of dent on culture, because I feel like it's a entertaining and fun movie that's actually about something.
Yeah, well, you really pulled it off. I think Oren and I both.
Thanks,
I hope
guys.
a bunch
Thanks
of teenagers go see it at drive-ins and then stop using social media.
That would be awesome.
Eugene, do you have a time to hang out and endorse with us real quick?
Unpaid endorsements.
I'll kick it off, Eugene. There's a new comic out, or a new graphic novel, if you want to be fancy, called The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist. It's by an artist named Adrian Tomine. I think he's quite famous for like his New Yorker covers. I think you'll recognize. And he has been like an indie comics artist since the 90s. I think he was kind of a wonderkind from Sacramento, which is where I'm from. And so I've always loved his work. And he kind of went on a long hiatus. He had some kids and just kind of was hanging out. And this is his return to the form. So it's a fun kind of autobiographical piece just about the nature of being a solitary artist. And so I think it's really interesting for both this time period, all the COVID-ness of it, and then also just how you relate as a screenwriter or a filmmaker, because there's a lot of alone time. So The Loneliness of the Long Distance Cartoonist.
And how do you read this? You buy it?
You buy it like a book, you know, just like you can get it from your
Amazon
local indie bookstore. Yeah, or that
cool.
too.
Thanks.
That was interesting. I like that recommendation. On Instagram, there's an account called Tuck the Suck Man, and he has been during quarantine making a weird series of videos called Altadena, Cyber Detective, and he's sort of working with the tropes of noir, but in a really like intentionally stupid and campy way. And just literally kind of what I was saying before, just someone who is taking their phone and a kind of like, you know, digital camera and doing something fun and creative with their friends. And it's just something I kind of check into every once in a while. And I'm like, oh, this is like so stupid and funny and underseen.
Tuck the Suck Man. TuckTheSuckman.
Yeah.
He has 698 followers. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get it up.
700.
Come on, everybody.
Yeah, let's get to the 700.
That's awesome. Yeah, this looks really cool, actually. I'm surprised.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Few.
All these things where you can click on play, that's Altadena. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I have two things. One is very LA, and then the second one I think Eugene will hate. But have you guys heard of Millard Falls in Altadena? So we were going to go to the beach yesterday, and it was very cold, and so we were like, oh, we should go hiking somewhere, but I like never go hiking. And I texted my friend who's always posting like amazing waterfall photos on Instagram. And I was like, where do you go hiking? And she said, well, I have a 4-year-old, if you want like a real easy hike that you can literally take your parents to, and stuff. It's 1 mile. It's 150 feet elevation. It's in Altadena, which is right by Pasadena, 25 minutes away from Silver Lake. It's called Millard Falls, Millard Falls, and it's a waterfall. And it's just like, it blew my mind that so close to Silver Lake, which is the opposite of a waterfall, you can go and it's like tree-covered creeks that you have to climb over and logs you have to walk on. And it was pretty COVID friendly. You know, most people were wearing masks and stuff, kind of some narrow paths and stuff, but it was just beautiful and awesome and free. And Millard Falls, check it out. And then the second thing, and I hate to endorse something that spams my Instagram feed all the time, and I think I've even talked about them before, but I got these shoes, these Vessy shoes, Vessi, and they claim to be like totally waterproof. And I bought them for the rain, and then it never rained because we live in LA. And I wore them yesterday, and I literally was walking inside this waterfall, like in like foot deep water, and my socks stayed dry, and they look like totally like regular sneakers, Vessi. So I'm not saying you should buy them, but if you are wondering if they really are waterproof, then yes, it's insane. And New Balances, for the record, are somebody can like sneeze a mile away from you and your sock will be soaking wet. So they're the least waterproof shoe I've ever worn.
That's especially important in these
yes.
days. Awesome. Well, Eugene, this was such a treat. Thank you so much.
To follow you, I mean, obviously, everyone should follow KurtzWorld96 on Instagram. But are you also a person on there?
Yeah, you can follow me at Mad About Huge.
Mad About Huge.
Yeah, not bad.
Love it.
Not bad. And your website, I noticed, everybodyloves.me. That's pretty great.
Yeah.
That's pretty
I think I'm going to go a little dark. I don't know. I was going to say, I think I'll go a little dark after the promo campaign and the movie's out, because I'm working on that promo campaign like 24/7. But who knows? I probably won't.
You feel like my movie blew up. Here I am at the drive-in.
Oh yeah, and you're gonna be at the ArcLight.
Well, we can't wait to see.
Doing a Q&A, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, tomorrow. Well, it'll be too late for this, but yeah, there quote unquote was a Q&A on Tuesday, August 11th at the ArcLight Drive-In at the Vineland Drive-In Theater.
Maybe that archive is online. If so, we will throw it up on the site. Thanks so much. If you want to learn all about the things that we talked about on the show and check out the trailer for Spree and all of the other things that we dropped, you can go to justshootitpod.com, and you can follow us across all social media at justshootitpod. I'm at Mr. Matt Enlow.
And I'm at O'Kaplan on Instagram and at Smitey Pyleg on Twitter, where I'm doing more tweeting for some reason. Call us, leave us a voicemail, 1-262-SHOOT-1. Email us, justshootitpod@gmail.com. And this episode was edited by Sarah Weirda. Our webmaster is Ewan Williams. And the music you're listening to is from the Free Music Archive and the artist Jahzzar. Thanks for checking it out.
Thanks, everyone.